First on the agenda is a presentation by our guest artist, Delana Flowers, who I'll introduce in a minute. After that, I'll talk very, very briefly about positive racial identity, what it is and why it's important. After that, I'll introduce our panelists, and then they will engage in what we're calling lightning talks. They'll talk for about 5 minutes about a topic related to the theme that's of their own choosing. I'll be asking all the panelists after that some specific questions related also to the theme. We'll pop in a quick poll to get a sense of how you're feeling about our program this evening. After that, we'll open it up to questions from you, our virtual audience. That will be followed as we kind of wind down the program by a raffling off of 2 books for tonight's event. We'll wrap things up and close things out for the evening after that. Just so you know, the 2 books that we'll be raffling off are Unearthing Joy, a guide to culturally and historically responsive curriculum and instruction by Dr. Gholdy Muhammad, and We Are the Change We Seek, Advancing Racial Justice in Early Care and Education by Iheoma Iruka, Tonia Darden, Kerry-Ann Escayg, and Stephanie M. Currington. I should also add really quickly that this is probably, I think, the first time that we've received what I'm referring to as reactionary comments, anti-Black and anti-Black joy comments on social media in response to some of our publicity. So in addition to Heidi and Medina, I also received some negative messaging on Facebook and other social media outlets. And so because of that, unfortunately, we have closed the chat because we don't want to have to deal with Zoom bombing. However, if you do have a question, you can put your question in the Q&A feature in Zoom. So that was a lot. So having said all that, let's get the program started by introducing our artist, Delana. Delana Flowers is a multi-talented creative who loves using art to inspire, to teach, and uplift. She's a teaching artist, a vocalist, a writer, and an actress in a category all her own. She's been a P.R.I.D.E artist for 2 years, where she was an artist in residence at a community-based organization we worked with, and she was one of our artists at the 2023 P.R.I.D.E Pop-Up Mini Art Festivals. Her energy and diversity of talents fill every space of any room she enters when she brings art from her heart and soul to yours. Delana is grateful to God for the opportunities He's given her to add her gifts to the countless others He's placed on this earth. Wherever possible, Delana lives for those magic moments only art can bring, as it connects people in so many profound ways. And I will add just really briefly that I had a chance to watch just a snippet of Delana singing I Put a Spell on You, and it was awesome. So if you want to do a search for Delana, I Put a Spell on You, you're in for a treat. Welcome, Delana.
Thank you so very much. I'm so excited to be here. As stated, I am a teaching artist and I love what I do. I love my job. I love having the opportunity to pour into our youth. And I want you to just, if you can indulge me for just a moment, and just imagine what your adult Black joy would look like if someone had planted seeds of positivity, positive self-perception, positive, if they had planted seeds of self-love, if they had planted seeds of self-acceptance while our minds were still young and impressionable, what would our adult Black joy look like now if that had happened then? What would our adult Black joy look like if the adults in our lives when we were younger had the resources and the tools and knew how to hand us a mirror that was shaped in love instead of self-hate and criticism? What would we look like as adults if that had been the case for us as children? And that's what I think about when I walk into a classroom and I share my art with them. I love using my art as a vehicle to plant those seeds in young minds before society has a chance to tell our Black children what they are not, what they can't be, what they should or shouldn't look like, what's beautiful and what's not. I love having the opportunity to help shape the internal voice that will speak to them in their own minds as they become adults. So I wanted to share with you a song that I wrote. I had the book Hair Love, which I absolutely love, absolutely adore. Hair can be such a big thing. I mean, we're still as adults fussing with our hair and messing with it and not satisfied with it. But what if someone had told us that our hair was beautiful when we were children? If they had told us that our hair is beautiful because we're beautiful, our hair is amazing because it's part of us, and everything about us is amazing, not because of what we do or what we do to it, but just because we exist. We are extraordinary because we exist. How much pressure would that have relieved for us as children, as adults? What would that have done for our esteem? So I saw this book, Hair Love, and as a music lover, I know that if you want someone to remember something, put it in a song. I still remember songs from like kindergarten, which is funny because that's how, even in our culture, how things are passed down. They're passed down, put it in a song and we'll remember it. So I wanted to put positivity and self-respect and self-esteem into a song. So I wrote a song to go along with the Hair Love book. And I teach it to children, and the kids just love it, and I love it, and adults love it, because I really do believe that even as adults, when we work with children, it's an opportunity for us to reparent ourselves. And so every time I sing this song and I bring this song to a classroom, I'm also speaking these things to myself and reminding myself that I'm beautiful and I love my hair because I love myself. And I encourage them to do the same. So I would love to share my video with you. I'm not sure if I had, oh, there we go. I'm not sure if anybody else is getting audio, but I'm not getting any sound.
Long, short, bald, braids, twist, locks. I love my hair. Kinky, curly fro, beads, volleys, bows. I love my hair. I love my hair. My hair can do so many things. I love my hair. I love my hair because I love all of me. Puffs, ponytails, plaits, in wraps, scarves, hats. I love my hair. Straight, knots, buns, messy, combed, brushed. I love my hair. I love my hair. My hair can do so many things. I love my hair. I love my hair because
here because I love all of me.
I am so grateful for this opportunity to share my song with you. I created that during the pandemic. So during that time, we had a lot of time to like reflect on ourselves, reflect on our place in the world, reflect on so many things. So I took it as an opportunity to give parents and educators a resource to help build the esteem and self-love and peace and joy for our babies and in turn for adults as well. Thank you so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of the presentation.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'm giving you my my virtual thank you, Delana. I actually looked at the video before the program tonight, and all I could do is just keep smiling. And I was actually catching on to the refrain, and now I am probably going to have that song in my head. So thank you. And I have to add, I've just already been trying to figure out, okay, how can we get this to our parents that we work with, our teachers that we work with? I noticed there was a thank you from one of our friends in Philadelphia. We're going to be sharing it with them. So I Love My Hair is going to be going some other places. So thank you so much again. So before I introduce our panelists in our program this evening, I want to just briefly talk about what positive racial identity is and why it's so important, not only to young Black children, but to the healthy development of other children who make up the global majority as well. So when children have a positive racial identity, they know what their race is, first of all. So they understand that they are Black. And if they're too young, maybe they at least understand that their skin is brown, and their parents start to help them make that connection to an abstract construct like race. But they also feel good about themselves in terms of their phenotype. That is what they look like. So they feel good about their skin. Delana's song is a perfect example of a resource that can be shared with teachers and with adults to help children develop positive ideas about their hair, for example. But additionally, children know that they are part of a larger group. So they start to understand that they're part of their family, and their family members, by and large, look similar to them. And then their parents and educators are able to help them understand that they're part of an even larger group of people who have similar characteristics, physical characteristics, and most importantly, they feel good about being part of that group. They feel good about what they learn about their history, and they have positive attitudes towards that group. So when children are able to celebrate their Blackness, that can have positive effects on their mental health, and that's been shown that to be a buffer against the negative aspects of discrimination that we know that many Black children and other children of color experience in society. So there are loads of research articles out there about positive racial identity. Some of them have actually been written by some of our friends who we know personally at the University of Pittsburgh. For example, Dr. Jay Hughley, who's in the School of Social Work at the university. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more, all you have to do is go to Google Scholar, put those search terms in, and you'll find as many articles as you want. And if you have questions, you can put those in the Q&A as well, and I'm happy to answer them, as would any of the other panelists be happy to answer your questions. So next, we're going to move into an introduction of our panelists. And remember, the panelists are going to be all introduced, and then they will do what we're calling their lightning round of information sharing. I'm starting with Kara. Kara Simonillo is the executive director of Trying Together, a Pittsburgh-based nonprofit organization that supports early childhood work through advocacy, community resources, and professional growth opportunities, all designed to meet the needs and protect the rights of children, their families, and the individuals who interact with them. Kara is extremely passionate about play and is the founder of Playful Pittsburgh, a collaborative dedicated to advancing the importance of play in the lives of children, families, and communities. She has a Bachelor of Arts degree in Ethnic Studies and a master's in education and administrative and policy studies. Kara resides in Highland Park here in Pittsburgh with her husband, Provin, her daughters, Mia and Lyra, and her dog, Clover. Welcome, Kara. And on to Takima. Takima Bunch Smith has master's degrees, 3 of them, in early childhood and elementary education, in urban education policy, and in public administration, and is the CEO and visionary founder of Anasa Consulting. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. You can correct me though, Takima, if I didn't. LLC. She brings a wealth of personal and professional experience to her clients, having served as an advisor, educator, executive coach, equity consultant, and thought leader in the diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, and belonging space for almost 3 decades. Her work in the early childhood education arena inspired her to create Anasa Consulting as a way to bring an innovative anti-racism and social justice approach to organizations, corporations, and early childhood professionals, one that centers joy and liberation. Takima's groundbreaking Journey to Nia curriculum was a standout finalist at the 2023 Harvard Zentz Early Education Innovation Challenge. Welcome, Takima. And that brings us to Ron. Ron Adoko is Associate Director of the University of Pittsburgh Center on Race and Social Problems, where he runs day-to-day operations and spearheads strategic initiatives aimed at fostering social change through research, education, and practice at one of the nation's leading applied race research centers. He's also the visionary behind the Racial Equity Consciousness Institute, or RACI, an immersive platform designed to enhance the ability of learners to deconstruct racism and cultivate racial equity. Additionally, as the director of the Office of Social Innovation at the David C. Frederick Honors College at Pitt, Ron empowers students to address systemic social inequities with innovative solutions. As an assistant professor in the School of Social Work, he focuses on using structured cognitive behavioral training to challenge and change social biases and behaviors. I want to thank you all for joining us as panelists today, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. So our lightning round will begin first with Ron, then with Takima, and then lastly, Kara.
Good evening, everybody. Pleasure to be with you all. As was shared, Ron Adoko. I'm really pleased and happy to be in conversation with you all. And I want to start off by just saying many thanks to Delana for that amazing song. I too love my hair, even though today it's a little nappy. I could serve to get touched up. But I am grateful for the opportunity to talk about Black joy. And that's something that I try to prioritize in my life, especially these days when we know there's a lot in our environment that can make it very challenging to center joy. As was shared, I am the Associate Director of the Center on Race and Social Problems here at the University of Pittsburgh, as well as the founding director of the Racial Equity Consciousness Institute. I have a number of titles, but my work really focuses on how do we learn to make society better for everybody, and really focusing on the systemic barriers that prevent people from experiencing their fullest humanity, from truly experiencing the opportunities that allow them to embrace life at their fullest. A lot of my work centers on the fact that so many of us in our society are socialized not to understand systemic racism very well, which makes it very difficult for us to actively think about how we address it. And so I really think about how do we put resources together to help people truly understand the complexity and pervasiveness of racism and feel empowered to actively cultivate racial equity in their environments, whether on an individual level or an institutional level, realizing the work has to be done everywhere by everybody. I'd like for us, as we think about Black joy, I wanted to share this particular perspective from Beverly Daniel Tatum. She is the author of Why All the Black Children Sitting Together, and she talks about identity. I wanted to share this perspective with everyone for consideration. Quote, "The concept of identity is a complex one, shaped by individual characteristics, historical factors, and social and political context. Who am I? The answer depends in large part on who the world around me says I am. Who do my parents say I am? Who do my peers say I am? What message is reflected back to me in the faces and voices of my teachers, my neighbors, store clerks? What do I learn from the media about myself? How am I represented in the cultural images around me? Or am I missing from the picture altogether? As social scientist Charles Cooley pointed out long ago, other people are the mirror in which we see ourselves. And I share this perspective because I think about the ways in which my identity was shaped. And I reflect on my experience growing up in terms of thinking about my Blackness and how a lot of my early education really didn't put me in a position to center joy. When I think about my formative years, particularly as I was learning, particularly about the Black experience, a lot of it, trauma and depression, it put me in a position to not always value aspects of my identity, put me in a position to sometimes shy away from reflecting on my identity. A lot of my formative years was also dealing with a lot of stereotypes in terms of what Black people were supposed to be or how they were supposed to act, and really being resistant to the idea that I had to fit a certain mold. And so when I think about Black joy, it really does come in opposition of in the things that we see in our society, particularly those messages that don't always affirm what it means to fully embrace who you want to be and who you are. When I think about what it means to affirm Black joy, I think about what it means to actively recognize, celebrate, and foster the happiness and achievements and the full humanity of Black people. Really, again, being mindful, that has to be an intentional act in a society where that can sometimes feel like an uphill battle. I think about Black joy, particularly when it comes to the context of children and young folks. I think about what it means to create spaces where they can fully express themselves, where they feel valued, where they see their cultures and their identities reflected positively in the world around them. I think about what it means to have educational settings where young Black folks can actually see stories and see their history and the contributions of Black people in their curriculum in ways that empower them, in ways that uplift them. I think it means that young Black folks have to see themselves in the books that they read, in the heroes that they learn about, in the media that they consume, in the aspirations that they hold for the future. I think it's about educators and caregivers consciously working to address and dismantle those stereotypes and those biases, and giving young folks the tools to understand those things and to actively, again, celebrate and shape their identity in ways that are meaningful for them. I also think about what it means to create space for people, adults as well, to really explore their identities in safe and nurturing environments, spaces that honor their experiences and their backgrounds, spaces where they can consciously engage in open dialogue and reflect and grow collectively with the folks around them. I think a lot of this is about creating space where people can listen to voices, encourage dreams, and acknowledge our rightful place in the narrative of this society. I believe this sort of affirmation helps to build a strong sense of self-worth and belonging, which we know is all very vital in the development and well-being of people. I'm also mindful too that fostering Black joy can be an act of resistance in the face of systemic racism, putting ourselves in a position to, again, acknowledge the fact that our society may position us, speaking to Black people, position us to feel some kind of way, to have to deal with the traumas of oppression, but we don't know we always have to respond in ways that don't uplift us. That we can really focus on what it means to celebrate the vibrancy, the diversity, and the richness of Black culture, and to center that as we navigate these systemic barriers. I remind myself that this work is indeed a commitment to nurturing a generation that feels proud of their heritage, that's confident in their identity, and is truly optimistic about their potential to shape the world. And so as we continue this conversation today, I want to continue to reflect on the fact that we all have a role to play in creating environments in which young Black folks can see themselves thriving, reminding ourselves that, again, we have to work against the systemic barriers in place that might make it difficult for us to do so, but we can be engineers of a different future. I'm looking forward to the rest of this conversation, and thank you again for giving me an opportunity to share with you all.
Ron, I am so inspired, and I just love that you called Dr. Tatum into this space right away, because I had the complete honor and pleasure and gift of having her be my thesis advisor when I was in college at Mount Holyoke College. And I literally credit her and Dr. Sandra Lawrence with lighting this fire in me around understanding racial identity and making it a part of my life's work. So thank you so much. I'm like, we are gonna vibe as panelists so much. And I can see folks sending their emojis in the chat as well. So thank you so much. Again, my name is Takima Bunch Smith. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the founder and CEO of Anasa Consulting. What I do is I support adults to create joyful and liberated lives in early childhood and in organizations. And I do that through transformative executive coaching, consultation, and really lit professional development, as the young people say. So in 2019, I created the Early Childhood Black Lives Matter at School Symposium at Bank Street College. It was so well attended that 3 years later in 2021, during the pandemic, 2,000 attendees signed on and stayed on for 3 hours. The feedback at each symposium was overwhelming. Literally, people said, why did we not learn this in college? Why didn't we learn this in our teacher education programs? Why is this the only professional development opportunity we are having to think about how to dismantle anti-Blackness in early childhood? And so because of my passion around this topic and because of that clear mandate that I got from the participants and the attendees into the symposiums, I created something called the Journey to Nia curriculum. People really wanted a way to support young children and their caregivers within this deeply anti-Black society. And in many cases, we're clear that we also have a deeply anti-Black early childhood field. So I created the Journey to Nia curriculum to help adults understand how to center Black joy and how to eradicate anti-Black racism in early childhood. We can't do that for young children until we have done that in ourselves. And this is a practice that we must become aware of and commit to for the rest of our lives. And we also need to do it no matter where we are in this world. So if we're a policymaker, teacher, educator, assistant teacher, cook in the kitchen in preschool, caregiver, grandma, auntie on the street, we all have to do a lot of work to unlearn and identify anti-Blackness and how it's impacted us and how it continues to impact young Black children. So to me, affirming Black joy in general means that everyone, including Black people, understand that our joy, our peace, our play, and our pleasure are our divine and human right. Within early childhood, affirming Black joy to me means that adults, institutions, and systems create a container of protection around Black children. We must preserve and amplify their full humanity from birth on. It also means that everyone who touches Black children is clear that the problem for Black children lies within the anti-Blackness found in the US society and structures and not within Black children and families themselves. Black children and families are not disparities. Anti-Blackness is the root and the amplifier of disparities for Black children, and it has been that way for over 400 years. Black children, as we know quite simply, are magic, and it is our job to allow that magic to flourish from the moment they are born. I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of the panelists and being a part of this amazing, amazing visionary event connected to Pride. Let us go on to our next panelist. Thank you.
Thanks, Takima and Ron, for sharing. You both are very inspiring to me. So I'm Kara Simonello, Executive Director for Trying Together. And I want to thank the Pride team for inviting me here today. When I think about affirming Black joy, it begins with affirming who a child is, which really can only be accomplished in relationship with others. So it's recognizing a child's emotions, their needs, their experiences and talents. It's seeing themselves in their surroundings. It's valuing a Black child's family and culture and tradition as assets, something to celebrate, to build off of. When I reflected on this question and what it means to me, I kept coming back to the responsibility that I have, both in my personal life and also in my profession. And I considered what the responsibility Trying Together has within the larger ecosystem of a Black child's caregiving and learning experience. So for us, affirming Black joy in early childhood really starts with us, our organization, and I'll sort of explain why. Our organization was established 60 plus years ago to be in service to the early childhood profession, to those individuals who provide care and education to young children. So outside of a child's immediate family, the profession, from relative providers to infant, toddler, and preschool teachers and other childcare workers, spend the most time with young children. And Trying Together uses the NACCE standards of ethical practices as our professional practice or professional framework of our practice. These standards include that we will support the bond between a child and their family, that will come to understand children in the context of their family, culture, and community, and that children and adults achieve their full potential in relationships built on trust and respect. These are all great ideals, but what does that look like in practice for all families, and specifically for families who identify as Black and Brown? When it is happening, how do we ensure we're recognizing it, raising it up, and amplifying it so that it happens more and more? And when it's not present, how do we address it? So several years ago, we recognized that our limitation within Trying Together in meeting these ideals were hampered if we weren't putting those same ideals in practice within our own organization. So we needed to embody a culture of belonging and then apply that belonging in the work with the field. So I'm going to share a couple examples of what I mean. First, we believe Black joy means establishing a positive image of the early childhood field and elevating their voices in decision-making. Nationally, our field is 98% women, 40% women of color. The historic undervaluing of labor performed by Black and Brown people and women generally in the United States is appalling. It shows up in the words we use to describe it, babysitting and daycare, and in the patchwork of unfunded and underfunded mandates and regulations and policies. So we as an organization adopted a North Star, and we said, we envision a future in which all caregivers feel valued. And we have set into motion daily practices, large and small, to achieve it. So we established a Call It Childcare campaign where we speak about the important role of early educators, what the role they play in brain development, and we work to ensure their voice is at the center of decisions. In practice with the field, we celebrate wins all throughout the year. An accomplishment of an individual educator achieving a credential they sought, or a move up in STARS program quality, or even holding large celebratory events during the month of the young child, which is April this month, like our annual Early Educators Celebration Dinner that occurs just in a couple weeks. So just like the children they care for, those in the field of early childhood, childcare, and early learning must feel, see, and hear their worth. It needs to be made evident. So that's one sort of big example. Another one would be our organization must positively represent the children, their families, and the field who we serve, and especially those who are most affected by current policies, which is primarily Black and Brown children, families, and providers, which means our staff composition at all levels, field staff through positions of leadership, coaches to instructors to our policy team, needs to reflect the richness of diversity in race and age and years and types of experiences. This meant that we had to review our own recruiting, interviewing, hiring, and succession planning practices and make the necessary changes. In practice with the field, it meant ensuring home-based childcare providers, including relative providers, 70% of which are Black and Brown in Allegheny County, are validated for their work by being included in the broader suite of services and policy decisions that impact them, and make sure that they're tailored so they are meaningful to them, so that they know they matter. And then last, I'll say our staff need to be provided with regular growth opportunities for career pathways. Again, in practice with the field, it means ensuring that Black and Brown early educators not only have access to certifications and credentials and degree programs, but also the necessary support to successfully achieve them. These experiences must be meaningful, collaborative, and culturally affirming, from ensuring our CPR mannequins have Black and Brown skin tones to ensuring our coaches and instructors reflect back to the educator, to Black and Brown educators, that they see themselves. Our staff, 2/3 of which are coaches and instructors, need to know what bias, both implicit and explicit, and racism is, and how it shows up in caregiving settings. For us, it's meant securing funding to ensure we have the capacity to build this awareness in an ongoing way. And then our staff need to have the skills, knowledge, and confidence to disrupt racism and bias when they see it occur. As a relationship-based organization and field, what does this look like in practice? Is it calling in the person? Is it calling out the person? How do we go about it? It takes a willingness to put a child's interests ahead of our own personal discomfort in confronting bias and racism. And there needs to be an expectation that this is a part of their job as an instructor or a coach, that they do this in an ongoing way. And then lastly, I'll just share that it means taking personal and organizational accountability. So for us, we've conducted an organizational equity audit, identified areas of growth and goals, and then we keep regular sort of attention on our progress. For our staff, it means being asked questions like, how is race equity showing up in our daily practices? It also means engaging in biweekly affinity groups, and it's about knowing how to repair harm when it is done. So this work isn't a one and done exercise. It's a daily practice that has to be woven into every aspect of our organization, not supplemental or as time allows, but rather with intentionality and with resources. It's got to go withstand the changes in leadership and staff if we are to have a sustaining impact both within the organization and in our field. So thanks.
Oh my gosh, all I can say is chills, chills, chills from all three of you. Oh, you're about to make me cry. I'm feeling so moved here. Oh my goodness. Okay, so enough with my emotions. Let's move on to the Q&A part of our program. But again, thank you so much for that. 3 different perspectives, 3 very powerful perspectives. So if you could turn your videos on, Ron and Takima and Kara, while I begin the Q&A part of our program. That would be great. Okay, I'm going to start with you, Ron. Given the work that you've been doing for the past couple of years with the Racial Equity Consciousness Institute, what would you say is the personal work that we all need to do to build our racial consciousness as adults working with children and families? And before you answer the question, I do have like a couple follow-up questions, but I know we're a little behind time. So I'll just ask the initial question of everyone, and then if we have time, I'll come back to the follow-up question. So I said all that, but do I need to repeat the question for you again?
No, you're good.
Okay, thank you.
I appreciate the question. And my, I guess my response is very straightforward. We need to really lean into education. You know, as I shared earlier, we live in a society where most of us are not socialized to understand systemic racism very well, which means many of us are unknowingly positioned to at times perpetuate it. You know, there's a perspective that Peggy McIntosh, the social justice educator, once shared. You know, I was taught to see racism in individual acts of meanness and not in invisible systems conferring dominance upon my group. And I often share that I was the same way I was taught. You know, I was taught that racism was just bad apples and that those folks would die off long before not. And so we have to be real about what it means to truly educate ourselves around the complexity of racism, understand it on an ideological, institutional, interpersonal, and individual level, and be willing to address it on all those levels, and to be willing to, again, ensure that the folks around us also have an understanding of the issue, realizing everybody has a role to play in addressing this systemic problem, because systemic problems require systemic solutions. And so we also have to be well suited at understanding how do we create things that last, right? I know some of the challenges that occur sometimes with addressing racism is that we can often think about solutions in a very linear fashion, not realizing all the interconnected factors that lead to the outcomes that we see. And so I think it's important for all educators to really take the time to learn. As was shared by my colleagues on the panel, it's a lifelong learning opportunity, and to not really see that as a burden, but to see it as a benefit, right? To really think about how they can be agents for change. I know that the topic of racism can often feel overwhelming and anxiety inducing, but it doesn't have to be, particularly if we center young folks and their ability to thrive, right? That we have to give ourselves real purpose. And to me, there's no greater purpose than ensuring the next generation has a better life, right? And so we have to be willing to center, the need of those who really, through no fault of their own, often experience challenges based on the skin they're born into, right? And we have to be willing to all stand up and take heed of the need to educate ourselves consistently and thoroughly, and so that we're in the best position to be the most effective agents of change. I think for me, what I've learned in this work through the Racial Equity Consciousness Institute is that most folks, they truly want things to change, but often lack a pathway, often are challenged to figure out, where do I begin? And so we try to leverage the resources we develop to give people a meaningful way that they can actually construct their identity as anti-racist over time. So they can have a powerful narrative for themselves that drives them in this work, realizing we all got a role to play and we got to have a story to tell behind the work that we want to do. And so I really do think that focusing on education and getting people to really understand the challenges that we deal with is key, because I believe racism, systemic racism, is a solvable problem, but you have to know what the problem is so that you're in the best position to address it.
Oh, I love that. Developing your, creating or understanding your identity as an anti-racist. I love that, Ron. Thank you. Takima, could you talk a little about what you're currently seeing in early childhood organizations related to the topic, including in classrooms and among teachers, parents, and caregivers regarding positive racial identity?
I can, Dr. White, but I'm itching to be in conversation because the panelists are bringing up so many important points. I just feel like I want to take some of those threads and run with them. And so
you're reading my mind. I'm feeling the same way.
I'm like, this is so important. It's just so important that we have these conversations and we share this knowledge, and that everyone who is listening listens and then moves to action tomorrow, right? Like, because we all can feel good and feel like we learned something, but if we don't do something active tomorrow, then it'll just stay here on Zoom, on YouTube, right? And that's not why we're here. And so I think what I will just say before I get exactly to your question, Dr. White, is that Ron, your points about developing an anti-racist identity and understanding racism as a systemic issue are so critical, right? It's like the core of it all. And while we look at the core and the roots of racism, we also have to recognize the reality of a huge portion of racism is anti-Black racism. And so when you have a specific problem of anti-Black racism, you also have to have a specific solution to that as well. And so sometimes I get worried when I hear people talk about just children of color or racism in general, because I know that, like a colander, what's going to happen is Black people are going to fall through those cracks and not fully be supported, because the specific nature of anti-Black racism in the United States of America is its own thing, right? And so I just want to make sure we're kind of keeping that in mind, that it is all incredibly important. And that for Black children, we've got to put a spotlight on them as well, in particular, and all children. We can say the same thing about, anti-Asian oppression, et cetera. So just wanted to kind of start there. And as I was thinking about this question, I don't go into classrooms on a daily basis anymore, or even a weekly basis, but I do work with people who are there. And so I'm doing this professional development and coaching around anti-racism, DEI, and anti-Blackness. And so what I'm understanding is that not a lot has changed from when I went to graduate school and started teaching. So traditionally, early childhood classrooms and institutions have been race silent. They have been racism light, very much in the person-to-person phenomenon that you mentioned, Ron, and diversity superficial, I'd like to say. I have not ever really heard about explorations of anti-Black racism in classrooms with young children, or even discussions and conversations about identity, period. It's often that there are these decontextualized conversations about Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks. They talk a lot about MLK and his murder side by side. And then Rosa Parks is always, sort of put forth as a woman who is very tired and sat down one day on a bus, and not the actual reality of her being a part of a well-planned, organized, coordinated civil rights protest, and that she also wasn't the first person to sit down on the bus, right? And so this is what children are getting, which is a lot that they're not getting, right? So they're not learning, like what you said, Dr. White, that they have a race, right? Period. And so for Black children, the first conversation about race is often about MLK getting murdered. And if any of us know the concreteness of a young child, usually I'll ask people, so what do you think kids understand about being Black, whether they're Black or not? And like this light bulb goes off, and they've been doing MLK in January forever. And they're like, wait a minute, the children think there's something that makes Black people get hurt, or there's something wrong with them, because who gets hurt if they didn't do something wrong, right? And it's just so people go, oh my God. And then they look and they're like, well, what do I do, right? And so that is the question, what do I do? We also have this, we have skin tone crayons and paint, right? So you go pick out your complexion, and, oh, look, you're dark, I'm light, you're peach, whatever. So first of all, I'm gonna say that if you are a Black child in a predominantly white classroom, dark and light means something very different than if you're a Black child in a classroom with other Black children. So we've got to first have that conversation, right, about what that looks like on the spectrum. Sort of who's the center of that conversation. But then once that happens, it's like the conversations in early childhood are like, look, we're all different colors and we're all the same but different. So again, completely decontextualized in terms of understanding race, racism, Black identity, anti-Blackness, like not really happening. And then now in 2020, in the wake of the murder of George Floyd and the subsequent BLM protests that many children, right, were just completely exposed to, whether they were taken directly or they, saw it on the news or saw their family members and community members, participating in it. That came into classrooms, and early childhood people were like, how do we talk about this? So I have to tell you that I heard, unfortunately, that people talked about the murder of George Floyd with young children like under 6. And so I actually was interviewed in a Chalkbeat article where I was like, don't do that. Just don't ever do that. Like, that is not the right way. And also, what are you actually doing to support Black children to develop a positive identity? Well, one thing that I noticed, and I'm not sure if the pandemic kind of increased this, while caregivers tended to have more time and space with their children and more agency around, like, I actually am the one that I'm going to be taking responsibility for and pride in, like, teaching my kid, because, right, school was kind of confusing and some daycares or preschools were not open. And I noticed that on social media, I started seeing a lot of things being shared, similar to Deanna Flowers, I love my hair, and books. And now we have Gracie's Corner, the ABCs in Afro beats, and a hip hop this, and Snoop Dogg did a affirmations, and I'm like, people are actually creating what we need to create for ourselves. So we're not looking at, and I'm not going to name any names, but very expensive corporate curricula that are often mandated, right, by state and city agencies. I'm not going to tell y'all where I am, but I'm speaking very specifically about a city that I'm very familiar with. But right, so now I think people are like, we have to create the thing, because I think older people are starting to understand, wait, I love my hair. I can do locks, twists, braids, whatever. And I remember what I learned as a Black person, and I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to do that to children. So we're creating the videos, we're creating the TikToks, we're creating the trends, we're creating, a book that talks about body size, right? And that fat is good, right? And just like Black child magic. And so that's something that I am really excited about and really supporting caregivers to tap into, and also reminding educators that parent and family engagement is not a one-way thing. It is not for you to tell adults about their own children and hope that they listen to you so that they're doing the right thing. That's not how it works. It never did work like that. But if anything, the pandemic taught us, we have to actually be in partnership. And so figuring out what are our parents and caregivers doing with their children, how can we bring that into the space? And then how can we have a conversation about truly supporting children to first understand their identity, and then how do we create an environment that we bathe them and inundate them in absolutely unequivocally positive, layered, complex images and experiences of Blackness. Because when we do that, I hate to tell you, we're going to have an impact, but it's not going to take away the anti-Blackness, right? It is so deeply entrenched that even in those environments, we still see children expressing internalized anti-Blackness, but we have to start somewhere, right? And we have to raise the bar and keep pushing. So those are some of the things that are kind of on my mind as I work with folks.
Wow, I didn't have time to write down everything. I tried to take notes. But in the interest of time, I wish we had time to, talk a little bit more after each of you, but we just don't. I'm going to move to Kara. And Kara, I'm wondering what kinds of things you're seeing from a systems perspective, meaning at the organizational, local, state, and national levels around race and early childhood. Give us a little bit global picture.
So I see a lot of well-intended folks in the classroom and a few not so well-intended, who are sort of in the field because they love children. But like Takima said, I don't see or hear language or discussions about racism or anti-Blackness. We see a lot of language for it. I think, Aisha, we've talked about this even in our own work together. A lot of language for diversity and a lot of language around inclusion for culturally and linguistically diverse children. So you'll see that in the standards, the STARS performance standards. You'll see it in curriculum. You'll see it in the position statements that I even mentioned at the beginning of my talk. But really, there's no one, I'm trying to think, aside from folks that we seek out, like yourselves, who are really sort of centering that conversation. And I think, I go back to what Ron said. So much of it is about education. And Ron, I so loved hearing you say this is solvable, because I think it's most days you feel like it's so overwhelming and it doesn't feel like it's within reach. So I like hearing that. It's like I have to remember that on days. We need to build language and knowledge for it. And I think a lot of folks get really stuck in their fear. So those well-intended folks who maybe are seeking out their own education or their own growth, I think they have an interest in doing right by the children in their care and in doing better, but they often get stuck in their fear that they'll say the wrong thing, fear that they'll do more harm. And one of the things that I'm trying to model more, both for myself and for others, is to name the fear as a pathway into leaning into whatever might be the discomfort or the uncomfortable conversation or the feedback a person may need or want to give to another person. So I think it's okay to say, I'm not sure if I'm going to say this perfectly or say it in the right way, but when I saw you or heard you say X, this didn't sit right with me, and I'd like to talk more about it. And I think if we can help provide ways for folks to lean into the conversation more, we'll have more success at disrupting racism and anti-Blackness when it happens in real time. And I think that's where we've got to start, because I also think, and I try to remind folks, childcare and early childhood is a consumer-driven sector. And so if we can get more families asking questions like, how do you affirm children, and specifically Black and Brown children, in your classrooms? Or having white parents ask programs about their practices and policies as it relates to combating racism, because this is not a Black problem. This is a white supremacy problem. This is an anti-Blackness problem. This is a problem of white folks. So if we can get more white folks really stepping into that and helping to drive the discussion, that's going to have massive change. But we've got to get folks there. And I think, to Ron's point, education is a big piece of it.
Thank you for that, Kara. And I did have a question scheduled for Delana. Delana, are you around, or are you not around? If not,
Yes,
we
I'm
can-
still here.
Okay. So Delana, this question is for you, and then we're going to shift to, we do already have an audience question. As an artist, actually as a Pride artist, what role do you see Africana arts playing in strengthening young Black children's positive racial identity, their joy, and their self-love?
When I think about this question, I think about an experience, and I'll say this quickly, an experience that I had with my mother recently. I love my mother. I know she loves me, but this particular day, she decided to say very positive words and tell me specifically what she thinks about me. And I said to her, I said, Mom, you don't know how much that meant to me. You don't know how that like really healed me. And she said, well, just because I didn't say the words before doesn't mean that the love wasn't there. And I said, well, I didn't question whether you loved me or not, but I just needed to hear this person who is so important say positive things about me. So much of our self-perception comes from the people that are most important to us. So for me, as a Black woman who was once a Black child, who is now a Black adult with a village, I feel like it is my responsibility to say the words, to say the positive words, to give our children those positive words. I'm sure we can assume that they know that we love and we care about them, but what gives words power is who says them and what they say. So as educators, as parents, as adults, I just feel like it is our responsibility, and it's a beautiful thing to be able to actually say the words. There are so many things that make our children feel like they're not enough, like they're not good enough, like they're, and then we have that inner critic. But for someone that is meaningful to them, to say the words is such a powerful thing. And that's how I feel when I walk into a classroom, or anytime I'm around our babies. I love working with them. I take it personally, and I see it as an honor to actually say the words.
Okay, thank you. So if you, our audience, if you take nothing away from tonight, it's say the words.
Say the words.
So we do have time now to move into, we do have one audience question. It's directed to Takima. Takima, they would like for you to talk some more about what real partnership with families in this work looks like around anti-Blackness.
I feel like we could talk about this for days, to be quite honest, but I'll start here. I have a son who's 18 and a half now, and the time has gone by very quickly. And I loved infancy because, and early childhood, because that's my jam. And I remember when I went to look at preschools, I kind of walked in and walked out, right? And then I walked into one and I said, well, I like this one, but I think he's going to be one of 2 or 3 Black children. And so I went to talk to the director after, who both reassured me that he would be okay, but also understood my concerns and then said, well, these are the things that we're working on. And I said, okay, can't get it perfect. I've got to find my top two important things. And it was that he was going to feel loved and that he would have a play-based, developmentally appropriate community program. And so that's what we went with. And then I got on the board and did everything that I had to do. But this is what I'm going to say. Similar to what Kara said, a consumer-driven business, we tend to forget that Black parents and caregivers don't have to give us their children, right? There is a risk that we take when we let our children out of our home and put them into formal care and education that in many cases we know has harmed us, right? And so we have a trauma around it. But we have jobs. We have been socialized to think that preschools are the best place and schools are the best place. But in our heart of hearts, we know that a lot can go wrong in those spaces. And so if programs look at a Black caregiver that is going to come and bring their child to them and say, thank you so much for implicitly trusting that I will take care of your baby, that I will support your baby just like you do. Even if I don't communicate in the way that you do, even if my idea of family doesn't look like yours does, the way I dance, sing, whatever, do my hair might be different, but I'm going to listen to you, talk to you, and make sure that what is happening for you that is so positive around your child will be amplified. And I'm also here to hold you as you work through the challenges of raising a child in an anti-Black society. So when I think about partnership, I'm thinking that preschool should be like, thank you. Thank you. What do you need from me to make sure that you are comfortable giving me your baby for 6 or 8 or 10 hours a day? If we start there, then we're going to get somewhere with partnership, right? Then we're going to have the trust. Then we're going to have the Black parents that are not like, don't talk to me. Right? Like, because we know that's a thing. And what do? We vilify them, right? We say they don't really want to participate, right? We do all that stuff, but we're not looking at the root that we talked about earlier. The root and the amplification of anti-Blackness is anti-Blackness, right? They don't start out like that, not trusting early childhood places. So my thing is go deeper, right? Go a lot deeper. And I think we'll get a lot farther in partnership.
Yeah, and when you think of all that will be required for them to develop that mindset, it's a lot of work with educators and with parents in what Kara was saying, and being positioned to make demands or make requests for what they want to see. Thank you both. We're going to squeeze in one more audience question before we do our poll, and I'll read it somewhat long. It says, as an educator, artist, and wellness practitioner, my thoughts are always centering the way to fold in, center, and enunciate wellness as a part of Black joy. Can one of you share your thoughts on this? Have you seen it in practice? Are there recommendations, especially for early education? So they're looking at folding in, centering, and enunciating wellness. Anybody can jump in.
So I'll say this.
Okay.
We don't do wellness well in early childhood.
Okay.
And I think so much of that has to do with sort of the history of the field. Women and Black women taking care of ourselves has not been something that's been sort of celebrated, raised up, and practiced. And so maybe part of the pause, at least for me, is to name that we don't do it well. And so I really welcome Ron and Takima, any thoughts and ideas you might have to that, because it's a definite area of growth for us.
To your point, I have a resource I can recommend. It's called Culturally Responsive Self-Care for Early Educators. And it's a wonderful book. Julie Nicholson is one of the authors. And what I love about this book is it basically gives a primer on critical race theory, which is a wonderful concept, a framework to understand the society that we actually live in. It's not, decontextualized political problem.
Mhm.
And so that book gives an understanding of the racism and oppression that is foundational to every institution, including early childhood. And then they talk about self-care practices through the lenses of different cultures, Black and Brown cultures. And they give stories of actual educators, early childhood educators and leaders, explaining sort of their connection to and how they engage with self-care practices. So that's one book that I would recommend.
And did you want to add anything, Ron?
Not speaking specifically early education, but I know one of the things that we focus on at the University of Pittsburgh is really getting folks to have a holistic sense of wellness and really thinking about what it means to engage in and really practice, whether it's spiritual wellness, physical wellness, financial wellness, social wellness, all those elements that sometimes, as Carol noted, we don't always think about, but being intentional about really identifying what does it mean for me to truly embrace a life, you know, whether it's in spirituality or my physical fitness, like what does it mean to actually feel good, right? What does it mean for me to actually thrive, right? That sometimes without defining that for ourselves, it can be very difficult to achieve it. And so really taking time to articulate what does wellness look like across all these spheres, you know, that folks have to be intentional about really spelling that out for themselves so they can give themselves something to work towards. I often think about, again, my own experience where there were times, you know, speaking to mental wellness, where no one ever really prioritized it for me growing up. It wasn't something that we talked about. Actually, it was something that was kind of hushed in certain environments. And so I never really thought about what it means to feel mentally well, you know, and so until I exposed that information and thought about what, with intention, how do I work towards that? So I think a lot of, again, really talks about just being understanding of the different forms of wellness that we can look to achieve and what it means to, with intention, define what wellness looks for us across those spaces.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all. I think we have time now for our poll question. I'm gonna let folks respond to that. Are they responding in the chat or the Q&A section? I think we have some responses in the chat with exclamation. Actually, somebody added 2 extra exclamation points. Thank you for that, Diara. We can hold on to those for our records. Okay, so while those are coming in, Dina, you can let me know if we want to raffle the book or if we want to go on and try to squeeze in that final question we have. We only have 1 minute for it. So maybe if folks are willing to stay on for maybe a couple minutes or so, the final question has to do with taking action. So let's see. Where is my final question? I don't see it, so I'll just ask the question. Oh, I do have it. So any of you could start. So what is one thing that you would recommend that people actually do to elevate this conversation, this learning, these ideas and changes in practice around helping kids understand race and develop a positive racial identity? One thing that you would recommend people do. Anybody can start.
This is Ron. I think for me, again, going back to what I shared, really take the time to educate yourself on how the world works. You know, I think, again, giving yourself an opportunity to really understand what are those systemic barriers that aren't always made visible to us. And then how do you put yourself in a position to think about the environments that you can help cultivate? I think it was shared earlier by Delana. How do you help cultivate an environment in which people can thrive? That's a learned skill. Right. And so if it's the case, you feel like you don't know it now, you can learn. Right. And so reminding yourself, we can educate our way out of this mess. Right. That if it's the case, human beings created the systems in which we live now, we as human beings can create something different. Right. And so we have to be willing, again, to take time to learn and realizing, again, that's not a burden. That's a benefit. That's all something we can do.
Okay, so we got educate yourself. I totally agree with that. There's a saying that when we know better, we do better. How about you, Takima?
It's so hard to pick one thing. But I would say that in my work with folks, one thing that is very powerful for people is learning about racial identity development theory. And that's for people of all races. It's very powerful for white people in my experience because of the fact that the white race is normalized and whiteness is normalized. And so I find that folks tend to have a very intense response, but then also they start to look at the world very differently and also to see their particular ability to have a role in dismantling racism and anti-Blackness. So, and then for people of Black people and other identities, it also can sometimes sort of confirm and make things make sense, how they experience things and how they viewed things, and particularly people within the African diaspora. It's always really fun because it was actually racial identity development theory was based upon Black Americans, and so it tends to have some really rich conversations. But I think learning about that so that we can recognize that everyone does have a race, as Dr. Janet Helm said, she was one of the other Black psychologists who kind of wrote about and to some degree popularized Black and white racial identity development. Everyone has a race, so what do we do with it, right? We then use our race, our understanding of our race to then understand racism and then to dismantle it. So that's something concrete that I would recommend people look into.
Okay, thank you. What about you, Kara?
Gosh, I agree. That's a hard one. Which one to choose, Takima? Uh, maybe I would say my wish would be more families, more parents asking programs to tell them about their racially affirming practices. So maybe I would ask about what does that look like in practice?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we do have, thank you so much for that. I don't want to be too abrupt, but we're already 3 minutes over. And I want to quickly announce the raffle winners. They are Ellen Doherty, who I know, Ellen, hi, and Marie Davis. So you will get either We Are the Change We Seek or Unearthing Joy. Oh my goodness, we needed another hour or two for this program. An hour and what was it? An hour and 15 minutes? No, hour, anyway, whatever it wasn't enough. I want to thank everybody so much for your questions, for your time. Thank you so much to Kima, Kara, Ron, Delana, our ASL interpreters, Medina for all of our hard work, Heidi for all of her wonderful work in the background. Thanks again to the P.R.I.D.E team and our funder, the Hillman Foundation. Thanks to all of you in our audience for joining us. And remember that if you want to be added to the Prideful News newsletter, send us an email and we'll add you to the list. And in a couple days, all of the participants will receive an email with a link to a longer survey. If you complete the survey, you're entered into another raffle with a chance to win one of the 2 books. Thanks, everybody, so much. This was wonderful. I wish we had a lot more time, and I appreciate having the opportunity to do this work. It is just so fulfilling. Have a good evening, everyone.